Well, I am back, and we are back, and this is the first recorded interview of so-called 2022, and the sun is shining, and everyone's a little fuzzy, bleary-eyed coming out of the cave of deep winter. And I just want to say hello to everyone again. Welcome to Underworld Party, and welcome to my guest, David Goldstein. David, thank you for being on the podcast today.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, we've been, sort of in contact for a while, and this is going to be our first sort of like deeper conversation. And I'm very interested in sort of like your path and your current edge of what you're sort of offering in the world. And just, I don't know, take as long as you'd like, but give the listeners like a 60-second like this is who I am and this is what I do, knowing that that's impossible.
Great. Okay. So this is who I am. This is what I do. I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, 58 years ago and change. I grew up city smart, kind of, always on top of things, kind of dude. I learned, like almost everybody else around me, to try to know the right answers at all times and represent myself as such. Somewhere along the way, I began to suspect that this manner of approach wasn't maybe the most, you know, inviting of well-being for myself and for the whole the whole schmear. So that's been a process of kind of coming up against myself, coming up against all the ways I was trained and conditioned, and starting to wonder, well, then what else might be invited? How else might I kind of hold my stance in the world if it isn't this way that I've been raised and this way that I see almost everywhere around me?
Mm-hmm.
So that's an opening kernel, maybe
That's
something
an
like that.
opening, for sure. That's an opening kernel. And um, what would you sort of say your art is currently? Like, what art form are you? If you had to like give it a sort of a name or a
Mhm.
phrase, what is that currently for you?
Yeah, well, the specific activity I'm involved in right now over the last few months is to be inviting others to gather in grief practice groups. That's what I'm calling them, grief practice groups. We made our first group, which starts off with, at this point, an 8-week commitment once a week on Zoom. We completed that. And that group is now going on to be a graduate group of sort, where we're going to meet once a month in an ongoing fashion. And two new groups are going to be beginning in a couple weeks, where there's that 8-week, once a week commitment, an hour and a half, and we get together on Zoom and we practice grief, which, of course, not only do most people have no idea what that really means, I don't have much of an idea what that really means, but that's that that's the best I could come up with right now.
Sure. Good. And so this is interesting because we all have been variously conditioned to have an automatic narrative around that word, right? Like everyone's got an idea or multiple competing ideas, or perhaps sometimes multiple complementary ideas, in the best case scenario, of this narrative of this word that we call grief in this culture, right? So we have to kind of bear down into the context that we're in a little bit. But I've gone through personally a cycle or a crucible where I was grief stricken, like obviously grief stricken, unrepressedly so, for
Mhm.
about like 2 years, which is to say, crying at trees spontaneously and being like, what the fuck is going on? Okay. So like I had this experience for 2 years where it was like all the repressed grief of like my childhood and my ancestors and all of this stuff that was sort of in a little zip drive in my nervous system, a little zip file kind of unzipped itself and sort of came out over the course of 2 years. And then I have had the experience where I would have answered this question about what I thought grief was very differently before that time period, during that time period, and now after that time period. So now in the after, and I watch all these people, usually very well meaning white people, right? Like, let's just put it out there. Usually very well meaning white people saying, you got to grieve your ghosts, you got to grieve your ancestors, grief, 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 grief. And, and I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm saying that on the other side of this period of time that I mentioned, I'm a little bit like, oh, this is different. And I want to get into that a bit with you, like your own journey with this spirit we call grief and how it might have changed, because I want to come to a kind of better narrative around what this spirit might actually be, not just the human centered narrative that we sort of see on the socials, grief, blah, blah, blah. So I'm just curious about unpacking this a little bit more, like what has been and what is your current relationality with this force that we are now just saying grief?
Yeah. All right. Thank you. All right. I'm going to do something that I forgot to do a few minutes ago that feels like it's somehow connected to this.
Great.
And then, okay. This is my first podcast. And like you, I've watched a ton of mostly well-meaning white people over the years. And one of the things I thought was I'm hearing the people talking about stuff all the time. That's what they're doing. And then I thought, well, how might we or anybody uh, be aware of practicing what we're talking about at the same time we're kind of advertising it as such. So that being said, very simply, I'd like to just take a moment to acknowledge my old ones and my ancestors, just to say Shmuel, Edis, Shandel, Hyman, and the lineages of Silverstein, Levin, Goldstein, Zaitchik. Thank you for living your lives such that I get to be here in this whacked out place in the year 2022, although theirs was no less. They ran from that place and washed up on the shores of this place. So thank you. You are with me and with us, and I wouldn't be here without you, and I'm not here without you. So
Yeah. Yeah. So I just, you know, when I hear you do that, and when I hear you say and speak to those beings directly, I can, there's a taste that arrives on my tongue that is interesting, right? There is a kind of taste or a quality, a salivary quality of actually speaking to another, right? And not just me and you here, but speaking beyond a veil that actually can be spoken through, and yet the sensation that comes back to me is some kind of coating on my own tongue, right? So I just want to sort of name that as like one of the signal markers of like, oh, thank you to those beings, and yes, and all of that, right? Like words can only do such partial justice to the lived complexity of our ancestors, and I think that that's part of my sort of combative or playful problem with such solution based definitions and narratives of so called grief, right? Like it's about solving something, and it's like, how do you solve a redwood forest? You know what I mean? Like, what is that? How do you solve an ocean? Like, that's not the quite the right approach, but I noticed the playfulness of even entering into this kind of, banter with the old ones, right?
Well, I'll just give you a real quick anecdote along those lines. I traveled to Ukraine after doing some research, and the shtetls in Ukraine is where my family lived, where the Jews were basically in, kind of semi-ghetto, confined places, but they lived there and they were citizens. Anyway, I found myself in Kiev about 4 years ago in some Airbnb. The next morning, I was going to be traveling like 5 hours to one of these villages, and I felt lost, overwhelmed. I have some health challenges. I didn't speak Ukrainian. I hadn't contracted a guide. It was like that, which when I was 22 was really cool. A little older, I don't know. It feels a little more fraught. So anyway, I was in bed. I was trying to get to sleep. I was tossing and turning, and I finally said, and I think this is a bit of a flavoring in the Jewish culture as well as other cultures. There is that very direct, no idols in a way. It's just like, okay. So I sort of asked, however I did. So help me here. What help me bring me peace and stability and all that stuff, just in that way. And all I heard was, because I had brought these packets of borscht, and I was planning to, and I had told them, I'm going to find the Jewish cemetery, and I'm going to go and I'm going to offer you nourishment. So when I was in that kind of fraught place that night in Kiev, all I heard was, you said you were going to bring us a borscht, do it. That was it. And I was like, it totally settled me down. I was like, oh, right. That's what I said I was going to do. I can do that. And that was it. And I was fine from then on in. So anyway.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
know?
yeah. The thing that resonates with me, especially in terms of ancestral practice, because, I've had my own path through varying approaches to this thing that we're calling ancestral
Yeah.
relationship. And one of the things that I recognized in the direct relating, which I kind of had to learn the hard way, which is fine, but is this directness, and there's a kind of pragmatism. There's a kind of pragmatism to the ancestors, when you let go of some of your need for them to be perfect, right? And the need for them to be like heroes, villains, and victims, right? This drama triangle thing that we project onto everyone, including ourselves. And what I sort of was fascinated by is that the more I do this, the more boring it becomes.
Uh-huh.
And I think a lot of people really want the drama of the so-called healing, and they conflate the healing with the dramatic intensity. But what you and I think, are saying is like the simple, direct, pragmatic relationality is both, well, one, it's less exhausting. It's just less exhausting. And for those of us who do struggle with chronic illness and other things, like we need things that work, that don't require us to be superheroes.
It's true.
It's very real that like a lot of so-called, healing narratives involve a kind of ableist kind of rhetoric in which like it's all about creating these high stakes dramatic situations. So I'm just happy to sort of understand you a little bit more of like this part of your ancestors coming through you, of this directness, this simplicity, nourishment. And in that, you were in an unknown place, and there was stress in that situation, being in an unknown, place, not speaking a language, which I'm sure most of our ancestors also experienced, right? Like, I'm in a new place and I'm alive and I'm grateful, but I don't necessarily know how to have as much fluency with everything as I would like, right?
Of course.
And I think that's also applicable to what we, the living, in 2022 are dealing with spiritually and ecologically. is that we are hell, like we don't have the fluency we would like to have, right? And so getting back to this idea of grief practice as the art form that you are currently engaged in, can you speak a little bit about that?
Yes. Okay. You know, there's so many ways and places to enter the water. Um, and yeah, okay. Well, I'll say this, that when I'm writing my emails and so forth, and I'm speaking of this work, I always capitalize the word grief. It's with a large G, a capital G. And I wasn't quite clear about why that was happening. So I thought about it a little bit, and what's come to me is that I'm about to say something that's going to need to be unpacked, because it's one of those things that doesn't have a place in our times and culture. But is that grief is a deity? Okay, that's why I've been capitalizing it. So then the natural follow-up is, what do you mean by deity?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And again, I will say, and this is probably going to get tiresome, if on a scale of 1 to 100, as far as knowing what a deity is, I'm maybe like at an 8 or 9%. Okay, so that's where I'm coming from. Most of this is guesswork.
Good.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So something like everything in this world has a certain place and a certain placement. And that was probably so long, 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 long before human beings appeared on the scene, like for millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of years. And it seemed like things were working pretty well here without us, as far as life generation and life, all that, and all the colors and all the vitality and all that stuff, with occasional enormous disruptions by geology, and then, it kind of rebooted itself. Okay, so that being said, it seems to me that in this cauldron of life that we call Earth, there's certain kind of bigger what laws, rules, ways of governance, maybe, that
Organizing principles.
organizing principles, whatever,
Yeah.
that are way older and far more powerful than our kind. And as much as we often like to think otherwise, we don't have much of a say in the situation. Okay, so that being said, to me, that's partly what is the deity realm. There's these entities
Yeah.
that are connected intimately to certain aspects of these organizing principles. And so the capitalization, it's almost like respect, isn't it? And acknowledgement a little bit.
Yeah.
It's like tip of the hat. Okay. So the grief entity, guy, girl, them, person, whatever, is kind of like, okay, here, this is my territory. And this is how it works, life beings on Earth. When you experience something akin to the missing of who and what you love and have loved, and those beings somehow disappear, that's where I come in. Like, you don't even have to call on me, but you can, and then I do my thing, and it kind of plays this part in the ongoing animism of things. That's the setup. And even if we say, but wait a second, the deities are like,
Yeah.
sorry, yeah, like that.
Scheduled.
So, yeah, that being said, then the wondering kicks in around, for me, and what I'd like to invite other people in is, on the one hand, the kind of macro wondering towards this deity of grief, and on the other hand, the kind of on the ground understanding that so much of who and what we love has disappeared and is disappearing. all the time, every day, and has been for years, and is only kind of accelerating with this upward curve, in these times.
Yeah.
And for anybody who wants to know that, you know, they know that,
Yeah.
obviously. And so if that's the case, and I'll just speak for myself, I don't seem to be um, inviting and attending to this deity-based process. There's a big disconnect somewhere. Somewhere there's a disconnect. And again, I don't probably have a say in whether or not there's a disconnect, but perhaps we can wonder and then begin to, approach the situation even. I mean, that's how impoverished things are for the most part, in my view. We haven't even begun because we don't know how. It's our ancestors forgot. It's been for hundreds and thousands of years probably. We haven't even begun to approach really. And my guess is a lot of practitioners who are drawn to this sort of animistic approach are doing their best to even begin to like pay attention to that really difficult situation.
Totally.
And so in for me, it was like, okay, what does it look like to begin to even wonder toward what an individual and a cultural inclusion of grief might look like as a practice or even as a skill
Right.
in a certain sense.
Right.
So
Kind of, well, I mean, you could say courtship, relationship, but it's like a participatory relationship with a big weather, like capital B, capital W,
yes,
and
exactly.
my particular practice that I call, I have a version of this and I call it death practice, and it's capitalized,
Yeah.
right? In the same way that it's like death is not merely a verb or some kind of noun that predicates a verb, which is like a thing about neatly ending something that began once, right? So there's this kind of, you have to break open the narrative of linearity a bit in order to say, well, death is happening, death is here all the time. Whether we pay attention and participate with death, that's a different story. That's
That's
a
a different
different
word.
story, but one that I have found has been sort of the grace of my life, having been someone who has somehow managed to survive diseases and, drowning and weird things where I'm like, I really don't have any particular right to be here. I wasn't particularly a great person or anything, but what I'm saying is that on the other end of those death, near death or close to death experiences, and the wave of experience that comes afterwards, which includes grief, right? Because it's like death has a caravan, and grief is like, grief is one of the like charioteers or something. It's very, or death is like the trombone player or something. Like grief is playing the cymbals or something, right? It's like there is a cavalcade of these big weather spirits that sort of ride together, right? They ride, they ride along all over the hills and meadows together. And
Yeah.
we usually like to avoid them,
Yeah.
like they're coming into town disrupting things. They're coming into town like kicking things over and ending things, right? They're not necessarily what our polite society deems a welcome guest.
Right. The phrase just came to me as you were talking. They're topplers. They topple things.
Yeah, they're like
Yeah.
little kids. They're like little kids running through, they're knocking down their the sandcastles. They're like whatever. And I recognize in myself, the if I look at things playfully, they become playful. If I look
Mm,
at things dreadfully, they become dreadful.
mm, mm.
And I only learned that the hard way, right? I
Mm,
only learned that by avoiding this force or this spirit and its caravan
mhm.
long enough so that I could recognize that all of my options in the avoidant category were actually not functional, right?
Right.
Like I had exhausted my own bag of tricks.
That's right.
So then I had to go, well, as I'm smart enough to recognize there's, okay, so there's another bag of tricks, which is not trying to solve or avoid these big things that cause intense feelings. And then what does that mean to go into that over and over and over again as a kind of dedication practice, like a devotional practice, just like Eastern traditions have a devotional practice to the deity. It's not merely like, don't hurt me. You know, it's not like praying so you don't get shocked by a lightning bolt, but it's actually like, I am trying to fall in love with you and I don't understand you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then taking that model and turning it towards death has been what I talk about. But I could very easily see that death just wears a different mask for you or a different face for you. And for someone else, it might wear the face of rage, for instance, right? Because alongside, death comes grief and rage and all sorts of other pain, fear, hunger. There's these big weather patterns, right? And so I try to sort of, tip my hat to those beings because there's no there's no place in my life where those beings aren't always doing their thing.
Right.
And once you recognize that there's no place free from them, you can actually become free in your relationship to them because you realize it's like trying to escape breathing or something.
Yeah. I mean, part of what I like long to be able to transmit in a skillful way is like what you just said. There's so much, to coin a phrase, good news, in the sense it's like, for me at least, I'm like, there's this huge burden lifted off me. Because they're like, oh, I don't have to try to do all that stuff. That's like being taken care of. I just kind of need to learn to attend to it, but I don't need to be the generator of it, you know. Um, and and dot dot dot, like this stuff really works. Like it worked before we were here for hundreds of millions of years. So maybe, like that, just
Right,
like,
right.
whoa. um there's this unexpected sense of relief, um
Yes.
for me, like, okay. And that's what I think I was trying to express with the word place and placement.
Okay.
It's like the world is the world,
Yeah.
with all these entities, the billions and trillions of different sizes and powers and interactions, orchestra, whatever, all that. And I'll say we, I usually mean human beings,
Yeah.
because we're a certain species with certain, capacities and limitations and all the rest. We have a place in that. I
Yes.
mean, that's, to me, it's like we have a home there, here.
Yeah.
And maybe, perhaps, one of our capacities, maybe a capacity, maybe that sets us apart from every other being on this planet, I don't know, is that we have the capacity to forget that.
Oh,
We have the capacity to take on the guise of deities or whatever, and to try to start making all the rules, the big rules.
yeah.
And ironically, maybe that has serves the purpose to exile us, self-exile us
Yeah.
from our sense of place and of home. And for me, that's kind of what boils down to. It's like, damn, show me the practices where we can start to, come back to our knowing that
Mhm.
that we have a place, that we belong here.
Totally.
And then, in fact, if we can remember that, maybe all the other beings will, say something like, oh, look, some of the humans are acting a little less like assholes.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
might want to cozy up to them again a little bit.
Right,
Anyway, yeah.
right. Totally. I mean, like I have these really complicated dreams at night, and sometimes they really like are about things that I'm about to talk about or about to do. Like
Mhm.
sometimes the inner relationality and the outer relationality use my dreams to like play. They and I remember, there's this thing about like putting on masks and taking off masks and akin to the metaphor of remembering and forgetting, right? It's like we have a capacity to forget, which allows us the sweetness and regret of remembering because it's a double-edged sword. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm so grateful I remembered, and now I'm like have to make amends for forgetting, and it's like it's a real mixed bag of like, thank you, I really feel like something was missing and it's been put back inside of me and I can really feel it. But in that feeling, I also now have increased responsibility and knowledge of my own stupidity, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's a very mixed bag. And I can definitely see why some people aren't really interested in that kind of meal because it's not like just the dessert. It's like a whole
That's what I
bunch
was
of
gonna
stuff.
say.
It's
Right.
well,
Exactly.
so I remember in my dream, a bunch of things were happening in some underground lair, some kind of catacombic place somewhere in history dream world. And I remember in one of these scenes, some person, some one of the hundreds of characters that was in this particular dream, it was like they were just fucking gone. As in like gone, like gone, like not.
Mm.
And I don't know if it was death or not. It didn't matter. It was just like a kind of goneness, a kind of
Mhm.
the death of an identity or something, and just gone. And before anyone could even start to talk about it or explain or like, you know, even just comprehend it with words in a certain kind of
Mhm.
linguistic sense, about four or five other characters immediately broke into some kind of like Irish sea shanty dedication to this being.
Yeah.
Like, as in, like, spontaneous yet perfectly versed,
Yeah.
like, like sonic architecture of encompassing everything that I just talked about and more.
Yes.
Like that being's existence and their non-existence in a way that was not conceptual and absolutely had nothing to do with like solving
Yeah.
anything,
Yeah.
but it was like they just and I and it was so powerful. And of course in my dream I was like, oh my god, this song is amazing, I wish I could write it down. And of course
Mhm.
that's not the way it works, but the point being is that some ancestral forces deep inside actually know that that's how it works.
Yeah.
Like there was a bunch of people who just they caught the spirit and they just started doing like crazy a cappella yelling, but it was
Yeah.
singing, singing yelling, and that carried the narrative into the next transition of whatever it was supposed to be. And then my dream went on to some other part of the dream.
Yeah.
But looking back on it, and this morning and today, it's like that to me is like it's so that again, it's direct, it's practical, and in some ways it's very simple. But it required those beings to practice because I know that I would need to practice if I was just going to spontaneously like scream sing when someone died and I didn't even know them, or maybe I did know them but they were just part of my village or something. So it's these kinds of, they're miracles really. It's a
Mhm.
miraculous capacity to be able to sort of remember these things that some of our ancestors practiced remembering.
Mhm.
And I just want to put that in there because it's like there is something about these big weather patterns that sometimes the only way I can practice is to like just shake and move and like make noise. Yeah, so I'm just, take that and run with it or whatever you want to do, but like I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, well, it's beautiful, really. I mean, I'm glad to have lived long enough to be in a time when there's more than like 7 people on the planet that are doing and experiencing the kind of things you just described. I mean, there aren't 7 billion, but there's more than 7. So I'm glad about that. Um, so yeah, there's so much in what you just said. I mean, but okay, one of the things that's just occurring in the moment. So I live in Corvallis, Oregon, which is a mid-sized town, about 60,000 people. And where I live, about a half a mile away, about 8-minute walk, there's this lake, this little lake. In the summer, it's a puddle. And right now, it's a home for ducks and geese. And it's really about 200 times the size of what it is in the summer because of the rains. Okay. So before I was gonna what verb do we use? Facilitate my first grief group. I don't know. I don't like to use teach because,
Yeah.
but okay, I'll just say facilitate. I went there and wondered what I was going to do because I'd never done it before. Now I had read Stephen Jenkinson and Martine Prechtel and Robin Wall Kimmerer. I had read the stable of people, but still, right? Okay. So I would go by the lake and I would wonder. I would just be there and I would do my best as this absolute beginner that I am, to say, hey, any help here is appreciated, something like this. Whether it be the lake, the water, some old ones wandering by because I just, laid out the chicken bone broth, which I do during the day. And they were like, oh, that was good. Here, why don't you try this? So anyway, that was going on. And I was thinking about it, grief work, right? Because like you said, grief, capital G, we think of, howling winds of catharsis and of, that kind of volume, right? So I was thinking about that. It's like, okay, how do you get your way into that? And those kinds of things. And what came to me just at that moment, what occurred, the thought was, grief work, something that powerful, it takes a certain amount of chi. I've experienced that with my physical healing. It wasn't until I recovered enough that I could feel some of the grief of what I went through because I was just too exhausted. Okay, so I'm like, and to have chi, we need nourishment. And right then I was like, wow, I have next to no idea what this place is about where I live, Now, it just so happens I moved here 4 years ago to Corvallis, but I think the same could be said anywhere I've lived. And I'm guessing the same could be said by most people in North America about where they live, even if they live there most of their lives. It's like, okay, I want to do grief work. We want to do grief work. But how malnourished are we right now? How malnourished am I right now?
Yeah.
What do I want to put on the Superman cape and then, do that kind of, and I was like, whoa, we've got to start at such scratch levels here. Like that basic nurturance, speaking of bone broth, like, I've got to just begin to, I don't even say court yet. Court is like 2 or 3 levels up. It's like to attend to wander toward this place that's been alive for, hundreds of millions of years and tens of millions with mammals and reptiles and birds and 20 to 30,000 with human beings who lived here, and so that's what we do in the beginning in our grief groups. Is there are certain assignments or place assignments or however to begin to study first, really literally, who lived here, 5,000 years ago, 500 years ago, 50 years ago, who still lives here? What happened to them? What were their interactions like? And perhaps find a place in the radius around you that might call to you, that might bring you into a deeper contemplation, and attend to it, begin to attend to it. Like, and maybe in 2 or 3 years, you'll have begun this, this practice in some sort of way. And like you were saying about, it's not all sweetness you're inviting people to, there's all sorts of tangs to it. Another part of that is, well, when will it be done? Like, how long does this take? It's like, you shouldn't ask that.
Yeah.
Like, don't worry about that. If you're worrying about it, you're not going to like the answer.
Right. Exactly. Right.
Something like this.
Right.
So, on the one hand, it's been a little shocking. Like, wow, is this person, are these people who have prided ourselves on knowing so very much all our lives, to be broken down to such a basic level? And I there's still a part of me that tries to figure out an alternative to saying yes to that, but it doesn't seem to hold much water. Which, kind of really sucks for part of me.
Totally.
And it sucks for marketing big time.
Oh my God, yes. Of course. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
I mean,
It's like sort of the opposite of self-improvement in a way, because there is no self to improve. There's a bit of the like breaking down of the like one could say that Westerners have a lot of knowledge about a little bit. It's like there's a lot of data in like one tiny grain of sand over here.
yeah.
But when you ask about knowing, and I'm not saying I'm any different, I'm saying that the poverty of our times is to reckon with the fact that we don't fucking know shit that we should probably know about our relations, right? Like the land that we're on, our ancestors and their practices, how we funeralize people, like how we help people transition from one incarnation to the next, which is like something the Tibetans like have down pat, like they're just like so good at it. But like over here in the West, we're like, cremation or burial, it's so small of a like the poverty of imagination is so small, right? Like the way, like we can't even imagine a good death most of the time. So we can't even imagine like what is beyond our constant sense of losing things, right? So grief on some level has to go through these phases, which is like first you grieve because you still believe you're an individual. And so you have all of these griefs about losing things as an individual, like whatever. But then eventually there comes this breaking of the capsule of the individual. And then grief becomes like a technicolor, psychedelic, ongoing, never ending, always has been here. Why wasn't I paying attention to it? It was always happening, kind of, smorgasbord of energy systems, right? And I think that, for me, and I talked about, like repressing it, then floodgates opened, and now I'm sort of over here.
Mhm.
For me, it's more about this like electrical quality to it. Like the grief as like, we can talk about things like ecological crisis or climate change or the sixth extinction, right? Like we can say those things as concepts,
Mhm.
but the actual sensing into that is like an electrical storm of things that I can't really describe and don't even want to waste my chi describing, because there's something about the quality of like just being in the storm, right?
Mhm.
Like the ionic atmosphere when you're in the thunderstorm, like there's a quality of like being in that place and time of the surging deities, right, around you, that I think is something that really makes me get to that place where I could maybe say that's starting to be grief practice, right? It's like there's something about not solving, not trying to get past it, not trying to understand it so much, but actually really just like being in it and really realizing how freaking puny I am in the grand scheme of it, right? Like I can't really shift it. There's like when you talk about things like leverage and shifting culture, it's like I don't really feel it, in that space because there's something about, the natural quality of it that is too much for those small control mechanisms to even get a handle on, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I've been wondering a lot for myself, and then playing a part, um, in beginning to develop these curricula,
Yeah.
so to speak. And to me, that's another using words like that are another way of pragmatizing it. It's like, oh, it's you don't have to like go on some fortuitous acid trip or whatever. It's
Yeah.
like this is stuff, man. This is just, you know, this is life, and these are practices in life, and we can learn them. Now, that being said, it would probably be a little easier going if we learned them, if we were part of a kind of intact, initiated community with elders who kind of had been weathered through their, their credibility, so that they've truly earned the trust, and that like this village or band has been around for 800 years, and there are as many animals and trees as there were, all that.
Yeah.
That would be, then you want to, you want to say, oh wow, these these skills are learnable, and everybody around you goes, yeah, they're learnable. Well, that's what we do here. That's not us.
Yeah,
So,
totally.
that's not now. And so my sense is that somehow in some way, and maybe if we were able to really pull back the lens a little, some of these awarenesses are beginning to arise, not like as you referenced with the capital W workshop, go get it in a weekend or whatever kind of thing, but more of that kind of just like, it's that like kind of nod. There's a little bit of fear in the nod. There's a little bit of like overwhelm and all that. And there's longing. Hopefully that's what brings us here, you know. But at the same time, hmm, we're not nourished for the most part in those ways that theoretical person would. So how oh, and then we live in a culture that is 99.5% mitigating against not only engaging in some of these practices, but even more challenging, explaining it to your friends. Like, so you know what I mean? It's like we're
Yeah.
social beings. So what are you doing? Oh, death clown practice. Oh, and then you know what I mean. So
Yeah.
it's not the most encouraging environment.
Right.
And then, sorry to keep, and then to engage in them, and then take the outs that are afforded in the kind of alternative community of mastering it and explaining it to everybody else,
Right.
giving workshops about it, and tying it into, a feel-goody enterprise.
Yeah.
So there's all these ways to
Yeah.
either never engage or to say, you know what, this is too slow. I don't even know what the hell we're doing here, so I'm going to go, you know,
Right.
study, ayahuasca yoga, or I
Yeah,
mean,
totally.
whatever,
Right.
or business finances or whatever. All
Whatever,
the yeah,
something that I can measure and have that has neat beginnings and endings,
and be rewarded for,
Yeah, there's
both
reward.
socially and all of it.
And it's reward that I want. You know?
Yeah, and recognized. Forget rewarded. Even recognized.
Yeah.
Oh wow, cool.
Right.
Gotcha.
Right.
You gotcha. That feels good.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Totally. And
Yeah.
that's I mean, and you brought up Death Clown because it's like this is the Death Clown show. Like all that you just mentioned is like it's like a very dark carnival. It's like, oh, this is you realize this is like a tragic comedy, right? This is dark satire, like,
Yeah.
and people are like, no, this is good, and it's like, no, the fact that you think it's great is the dark like it's like eats itself, it eats itself.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
some of us have that like kind of gallows humor where I don't know what it is, maybe it's growing up poor or having a high ACEs score, or maybe it's like having chronic illness or whatever, I don't know. But some people always are a little bit punk rock about it, right? And
Mhm.
they understand something about being with like the heartache in a way that produces art, not just sadness, right?
Mhm.
Like there's something about like being with the longing or the unrequited feeling or the regret or the like bad ideas that we thought were great when we were 15, there's something about some of us, some humans that have a kind of eye for that, the artistic quality, the creative impulse that grief presents us with, right? It's like, and instead of just lamenting, not to say that lamenting as an art form is not the thing I'm talking about, but it's like, that's the difference. It's like you take the solipsistic sadness, right? Like you take the like, I'm sad because I lost something I wanted to keep, right? Like that's okay, sure. Everyone knows that. Children go through that all the time. I lost the teddy bear I wanted to have forever. Yes, I know. This is practice, But getting to the place where we can transform or allow ourselves to be transformed by that quality, and then maybe we write a song about it, or we stage a banquet, or, we do something that actually requires us to get our hands a little dirty, right? And to actually create something out of our pain, right? And not necessarily to solve the pain because that's not the right thing, right? Like that, like that's anathema to the creative impulse. I want to draw the picture so that I can destroy the feeling of like whatever I'm having.
Mhm.
It's like that doesn't make any sense. The point just being that like learning to sit in that kind of humid air that you don't maybe feel super comfortable in, right? Like you don't put on the air conditioner though.
Mhm.
And actually there's this what is this force like pushing me towards or trying to get me to help out with, right? And that could be an art project. That could be writing a sad song. Plenty of people channel this through music, right? It's totally great.
Well,
But I'm just thinking about sort of like, because it's not about mastery, it can't be, but there can be some skillfulness in the transmutation of the pain that we feel that we might call grief, right? The pain that we call grief and the sort of memorialization of that which we think that we have lost,
mhm.
like turning our pain of loss into sort of like this, this artistic beauty, this aesthetic, to actually beautify the environment with the sort of memories of that which we are losing, right? Like this is and to me, in that way, are we really losing anything if we actually truly embrace that, right? Like if we truly embrace the like art as funeral, funeral as art, and we really aren't trying to solve anything because we're really kind of like, what the fuck, like what is there to solve? I'm just relating here. And getting to that point where we're not so maudlin or depressed about death and grief anymore,
Yeah.
right? Like I want, and I'm not sure that we're there yet because like you and I know, there's a few of us who can get jazzed about what we're talking about.
Mhm.
Like we're actually in the pain, but we're actually quite kind of pleased with the like, I don't know, the kind of like dancing with the devil in it. There's a kind of joy to that wrestling match. The struggle is kind of like really a spiritual like libation, like that feeling. And I want the culture to be there, like I want the culture to be like struggling together is like a libation for the spirits.
Yeah, you bring something up. I was telling somebody this story about 10 years ago. I got into a conversation and got very, very inspired about the idea of grief and grief tribe. That's looking where there's a grief, we can form grief tribes and, externalize, show it, like get teardrops or whatever.
Yeah,
No.
yeah.
So I wrote to all my friends, all my acquaintances, really excited. You're waiting for the affirmational responses to pour in about working with grief. Not one single one. It's like at least a couple people said, I don't know how exciting grief is. That doesn't inspire me. I don't know how much that inspires me. So I kind of, but you know how those things, they go subterranean for a while and then maybe,
Totally.
So,
Yeah.
so, you know, how can, I feel like there's an elephant in the room when well, almost all the time. So here's as best I can say. So you and I are talking right now in January 12th or whatever it is, 2022. And, I'm in this comfortable, middle classy setting. You're certainly got something going on for you materially, whatever it might be. So there's that. And I think it's probably pretty much impossible to escape the cushioning that comfort gives. It's just, we're creatures. So that's how that goes. Okay. That being said, so we're talking about these things and hopefully with some capacity, others will be the judge of that to an extent. But the elephant for me is like, if we're on a collective roller coaster, it's like, and that's where we are, as a species and as a world, because the world is subject to our proclivities, what we do. So this is weird to me. Like we act normal, partly because we're still comfortable, I would say.
Yeah, totally.
But also partly because, you try to talk to people about this. In my experience, I wrote about climate change for like 7 years. It's, you're quickly the person alone in the corner of the room. And so, all these practices we're speaking of, my guess is it's not unlikely that the conditions that make themselves obviously needed are going to be, increasingly evident over maybe 20 or 30 years or 10 or 5, I don't know, obviously the time frame. So here we are discussing these things, and most people in the world can rightfully say, what are you guys talking about all this stuff for? Like,
Right.
well, what's up with that? There's some stuff, but like that.
Right.
So for me, it's like, okay, the people who are all jazzed in that kind of, devil dancing way are there already, and they will be. But then or not even is it a thing, or how is it a thing to somehow do what, like to try to kind of spread the word about this stuff, because the setting of this stuff is partly, ideally, the shit's raining from the sky. So, but it's not really obviously to most people quite yet. So I don't know, it leaves me a little stumped, and the best I can figure out is to somehow try to get across, like, this stuff is good anytime. Like, this is not only a Mad Max kind of situation, And so, like, with grief work, for instance, like, one of the things a couple of the people I've learned from, Stephen Jenkins and Martine Prechtel, is that grief, well practiced, brings us to our alertness, and I've experienced that. Like, I'll have done some grief practice as awkwardly as I can. And the first thing that occurred to me after I did it for a little while, I literally went in the back and shook my body and did the best I could do to kind of semi-simulate grief, was I'm sorry and I miss you. and that was to the hawks and mostly to animals. That's kind of
Yeah.
seems to be my thing.
Yeah.
And obviously, part of me was in touch with that, but I was alert to it
Mhm.
after I had practiced the grief. It was
Right.
like it was just simply an alive part of the situation.
Totally.
And for me, I'm like, that's the gold, man.
Yeah.
So it's like, that's why I want to practice grief. And I would love to do it with other human beings and then have little communities practicing grief to
Totally.
become alert. And for activists, that's great. If activism is your thing, it's like, who wouldn't want to be clear thinking and alert both with your heart and your spirit and your mind and all those catchphrases to then go out and, you know, kind of act in this kind of, you know,
Totally.
warrior, samurai, whatever kind of way.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm attempting to do is say, listen, this is like bottled animism, man.
Yeah.
This is like,
Totally. Right.
yeah,
Right.
something like that.
Right.
Anyway, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's true that there's the alertness and the attentiveness. It's like, in like Dzogchen and various non-dual traditions, they talk about sort of like the clear light of awareness that has never been destroyed or can never be broken. It's because there is that sort of in that place of like I mentioned, that like electrical storm quality of grief that is like once you move past the like fear of losing something of the
Mm,
small self, and you can kind of go, fuck, man, this is wild shit, like this is like tectonic, geologic, cosmic, like this is wild, man, like, and some of that is like absolutely, oh, I contribute to the ocean being polluted with plastic. I
mhm,
contribute to that. Therefore, I cannot separate myself from the responsibility that comes from saying that I miss the thing that I helped destroy. Right? Like there's a real like paradoxical beautiful contradiction, which again I think makes the best kind of art, because it's like art is about like 20 years later coming to terms with something you needed 20 years to deal with, right? It's like, and then you paint a picture about it, but that picture was 20 years in the making. It's like that you had no cognitive say in that thing. And I think about this in terms of like something that brings me always back to the present moment, which is this alertness quality of like, and I think it's helpful to think of ritual because ritual is an event that is in a specific place and time with specific parameters or conditions or situations, right? So specifics matter. It's not just vague, like climate change is very vague, but saying something like the last red panda has died is not vague, right? It's like very like there was a moment when the last rhinoceros fucking dies, right? It's like, and even as I say it, I'm like, oh, there it is. There's the spirit of that.
yeah.
Like, I'm like, oh shit. Like, and I guess what I'm, getting to or trying to work through and around is always a funeral somewhere.
Mhm,
So, and what that means to me is like when you can behave in that kind of way that is like what you see sometimes at funerals, especially indigenous or black kind of places, right?
mhm,
Where someone is like doing the ritual reading, like somebody's reading a poem,
mhm,
and then suddenly a wave of spirit comes over people, and there is spontaneous shrieking, wailing, shaking, falling down, choking. And to me, it's like that capacity is always available.
mhm,
Because if I can know beyond a shadow of a doubt that there's always a funeral somewhere, there's more than one, obviously, but the reality of like that person is dead, or that person got murdered, or this tribe is trying to escape genocide, or these immigrants, that's the last immigrant and they had to leave their home. right? Like there are places in the world where people have lived for thousands of years, then suddenly they have to fucking all leave, right? And people die on the way out, and it's like, whoa, that's fucking intense. All of those are cause for funerals. Like all of those are funerals. Like all of those is like the real thing. And there is something about the alertness that comes from actually being in that moment, like the honoring of that moment, which is what a funeral is. The funeral is like the honoring of this very weird moment,
Right.
like it's like, what the fuck is going on, And we're all here because all of us are like, fuck, what the fuck is going on? And we're hurting together, we're
Mhm.
flocking together to communally digest this really intense moment of confusion and all sorts of intensity, right? And so this kind of funerary alertness, I guess we could say, right?
Mhm.
This funerary alertness where if we can do that a little bit every day, or like once a week, I don't fucking
Mhm.
care, like whatever, just
Mhm.
really go outside and fucking be part of the funeral that's happening right now.
Mhm.
Just go talk to the tree and please be like, bear witness to this. I'm going to try to say a few words for all
Mhm.
those we have lost. Well, I don't even fucking know. There's like, how many people died from COVID? You have a lot of choices here.
Yeah, and I wanna interject there. Like, there's part of me that can be kind of like a little bit of a, I don't know, enthusiastic hard ass in a way.
Yeah.
But then there's part of me that's like you're saying, it's one thing to live in a time and place, I suppose, where these things you're talking about are kind of taken care of on a maintenance level, right? And like, so it's kind of attended to along the way. But man, how, how much has accrued
Yeah.
of what you're saying that has been unattended to? You can't even, right? I mean, you
Right.
can't
It's
even.
unfathomable.
And so to kind of, cut ourselves a little break at the same time, like, man, this, oh God, I don't know if there's a bigger overused thing than the red pill, blue pill thing.
Yeah.
So I won't use it, but
Yeah.
but it's like, yeah, if we are gonna step into this, um, you know, we're the best we can do is the best we can do.
Yes.
Like,
Absolutely.
and maybe it will kind of kickstart something that in 100 years or whatever has accrued in its own right, and some things can get back to some kind of maintenance level. And
Totally.
so, yeah, to somehow begin to break it down so we just don't get completely overwhelmed.
Yeah. Totally.
And of course, the solution solving and the kind of big catharsis mitigate against that also, because you can't solve this and
Right.
you can't cathart all of it. You
No.
can't.
Like if you cathart it, you will explode and die.
Yeah,
Like
right.
it's too
It's like
much.
you'll get a good 1.3 seconds of that level of catharting, and
Yeah.
then then it's like, see you later. Thank you for your service.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Totally. Right.
exactly.
Right. Right. Right.
So yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, and it's very interesting too because on one level we have to be sort of like technicians of the
Mhm.
sacred, right? Like there's a bit of like don't put the fork in the socket. Like don't do this, do the like the technical aspect of it, which is like best practices, not so good practices, cautions and preparations, right? There's this kind of technical aspect. And then there's this other aspect where like everyone everyone's invited to the party, which
Yeah,
is not really the party you wanted to be invited to. Let's just
that's
put it
right.
that way, right?
That's right.
And part of it is also why, I named my podcast Underworld Party, because at a certain point, it's like you don't want to get that invite in the mail,
Right.
like the RSVP to the to the to the Underworld Party. It's like no, all of us are getting that invite. It's in the mail, right? Like it's in the fucking mail.
Yeah.
And when we get it, we're all going to be like, fuck, I knew this was coming, but I really wish it would have taken a little longer.
Yeah.
And there is this quality to like, it doesn't matter if you're prepared or unprepared.
Right.
It doesn't matter if you like it or you hate it.
Right.
You have some say in those things. That's the sort of the grace is that you have some time to prepare yourself a little bit. But the point being is that like the grace of death or the grace of God who is death or whatever you want to call it is that everyone's invited.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
think that to me that also was the great relief when I stopped trying to solve or fight these forces.
Yes.
And I recognized that the grace and the wisdom and the mercy was that everyone has to experience this and no one really can totally avoid it. Like there's a, the Buddhists talk about all this realms of the bardo where like you can kind of avoid it for 1,000 years, but it hurts like hell or whatever. That's fine. But the point being is that at the end of that meta story or the most meta of that story is that eventually all beings have to accept this like alchemical transmutation that you're saying, grief as a deity comes down and says, it's my job. I'm doing this whether you want it or not. It's not up to you to tell me I'm the plumber. You know what I mean? Like I'm the plumber, not you. You don't get, like don't tell me how to do my job kind of thing. And for me, it's a kind of strange it's a strange kind of grace to recognize the kind of complete unconditional acceptance that of what I'm talking about.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that's how I personally sort of deal with the ongoing kind of, like you said, there's an accrual, there's an accumulation. We ain't going to get through it. You can only do the best that you can do. And you keep trying to do better and you keep trying to like do it with other people and you do the best you can do. But there's something about the like we are doing this together whether we think that or not because everyone's invited, right? It's
Well,
like
yeah,
everyone.
yeah. And like all good Buddhisty things, all the paradox in that
Yeah.
is like to understand that is to then paradoxically become a much more functional earth being at the same time. Not functional
Right.
by normal standards, but functional by like I'm not engaging in completely normal hyphen insane activities and just calling that a life.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Then there's a bit of it's like it's sacred but it's not religious.
Yes.
It's like because everyone's invited and when you enter into that presence of like loss and grief and praise and all of those forces that we've talked for the last hour about,
Mm.
the only thing that actually gives you the sense of like participatory relief is this like the sacred way of being that you recognize the inherent sort of like everyone you meet is on their way out the door,
Mhm.
and that brings with it a kind of I don't even know if kindness is the word. I'm just going to use it right now. But it does bring a kind of awareness of something where it's like everybody, every being you are in contact with is dying,
Yeah.
is on their way towards this great crucible, kind of threshold place. And instead of avoiding it, I think, we have these conversations and we sort of hold each other accountable. We hold each other accountable to sort of remember that we're we're on our way out the door.
Yeah, and it strikes me that what you're speaking of right now, gosh, it's so often, things circle back to our impoverishment for me. This man I study with, Stephen Jenkinson, says, you watch yourself not to consider yourself to be in a valley, but it's really a crater. So, you know, there's something about when you speak of we're all dying and death, just death itself, the deity of death, there's a whole cosmos there, right? There's an entire, universe of dying, death, and all that. And we're almost completely non-conversant around that, amongst so many other things. And so is it useful and worthy to then begin to try to, first of all, ourselves understand it, and then to maybe begin to break it down so we can begin to remember in at least pockets of humans? Like, just for example, Martin Prechtel, who wrote a few books, and he speaks of death practice, and one of the culture, he is not, but he was living in a Mayan Guatemalan culture for about 25 years. And he said, in that cosmology, at a funeral, like you were talking, and of the grieving, I mean the outwardly expressed grieving and tears, that they consider one of the functions of that grieving to form the to propel the canoe that the spirit of the recently departed deaf person was riding to get to the land of his ancestors. Okay, so that's an aspect of that cosmology, right? It's sketched out. It's not a woo-woo abstract thing. It's a thing.
Yeah.
Like, okay. So for me, again, that's another aspect. We already have alertness if we practice grief. Now I'm doing this for somebody else. I'm like playing a part in this greater connected whole. Like I'm the gas station attendant putting gas in the car so it can go. Yeah. And again, it kind of demystifies it a little bit.
Right.
It's like, I got to show up. If I don't show up, I'm not fulfilling this obligation. And at least for me, that, what can I say? It provides a kind of blueprint I can step onto about not only being alive, but engaging in practices that contribute to well-being and kind of nourishment.
Right.
I don't know what else much more there is to earth life.
Yeah, sure.
So there is the unborn, undying thing that you referenced, that all the great spiritual practices, but on the pragmatic nitty gritty, I'm alive for 85 years. If I'm lucky, how am I going to spend my time?
Totally.
And if somebody tells me, well, these practices are going to contribute to the aliveness and well-being, then I'm like, shit, I'm in, man.
Right.
That's all I need to know. And that's, again, part of the, like, these practices, so many of them that seem so strange are in fact, ironically, basic, functional, pragmatic, life providing practices. In the sense of vitality and animism, not in the sense of not done.
Yeah, of course. Right. There's that.
And
yes.
And so, yeah. I don't know. Maybe.
Well, I mean, I think we're getting to the end, and it's a good end for this particular part of the conversation. I just want to sort of tie it, together with, like, so you did one cohort already. How many people was that? I just want to know.
Yeah, of course. So the way I'm structuring it is there's 7 people plus myself.
Okay.
And we get on Zoom for, at this point, an hour and a half for 8 consecutive Mondays or Tuesdays or whatever. And we have, I'm trying to think of another word than assignment, tasks. Maybe that's a good one. We have tasks to fulfill all throughout the week. And we start always with a song. Somebody brings a song, and then we do basic breathing, and then breathing with some movement, and then vocalizations, just very basic. So it's sort of like body first, body first, movement first, air first, vocals first, to at least set some tone. Yeah. And as little conceptualization as possible. Yeah. And we spend time together, and if at 12 my dream was to become the starting center fielder for the Philadelphia Phillies, my dream around this now is, first of all, for me to live long enough to enjoy a decent amount of it, and then to form very kind of proto nascent pods of human beings who are engaged in these practices in a wondering and kind of, um, like you said, you referenced earlier, something that begins to become ordinary.
Yeah.
Like
Mhm.
I shop for my food, I
Yeah.
do this,
Yeah.
and yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
Right.
something like this.
Right. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Well, I'm gonna put in, below the video and below the podcast, I'll have some form of contact info for you because I imagine that even if this round is full, by the time
Mhm.
people get to listening and then contacting you, there might be like a third round or something that happens. So,
Yeah, yeah. And yeah,
yeah.
thank you. I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
this is also the thing about trying to create village mindedness in a sort of play in the weird way that we are. It's like
Mhm.
not everyone can do every job, and that's silly to even think of. So we really need enough people doing enough of these things to get it saturated through, a culture. And so I'm really, happy to sort of be part of a kind of strange network with you because all of us have different proclivities towards what we need to do for all of this to sort of weave itself together again, right? So
Exactly.
I just want to say thank you and blessings. And, there is something here about like, really feeling all of your relations supporting you doing this work. And so I'm really thankful to both you for saying yes to it, but also for that background hum, that is helping you. And, yeah, I don't know what this particular conversation, hopefully it brought some I don't know, some more clarity to people who listen, but also maybe to you, like getting the chance to talk about
Mhm.
this really kind of weird endeavor, like it's a weird endeavor, and yet it is part of being a real, part of a community is trying to meet the absence exactly where the absence is, right? You
Oh,
know?
absolutely. I mean, it's really kind of fun to be in on the kind of vagabond and scoundrel level, you know,
Yeah.
when when you know, when this stuff is just so, you know, like that.
Yeah. Good.
Somebody will come along to,
Yeah.
make a killing on it, but right now,
Yeah,
yeah,
there's something punk rock about it, right? It's like everyone's in their, it's not really so popular yet that, yeah, but I like that too. I like the vagabond and scoundrel level. And
yeah,
we're just making it up as we go along, people. It's like really a little bit like that, a little bit like that.
yeah.
Cool.
Well,
Well,
thank you.
yeah. Is there anything you'd like to say as a closing?
Let's see. Um, yeah, I alluded to it earlier. I'm not relatively that young, but I'm really glad to still be alive when this all is picking up a little steam. And if you're a lot younger, if you're 15 or 20 or whatever, then come on in, and we'll do the best we can to at least demonstrate some sort of commitment to this place, so that you can come along also, and then be, you know, powerful and skillful in a way that we can't even imagine yet.
Awesome.
So yeah,
Cool. Well, let's help you get the word out to those young people that might actually, feel the call of this kind of thing because that's absolutely real that like yeah, we need to have that cross-generational talking and
yeah,
participating. Cool.
yeah. All right.
Well, thank you all so much for, I'm talking to the viewers now as I do. Oh, hey, viewers. I'm going to stop the recording now. Stay tuned for more. There's a lot coming this year as long as I stay healthy. So thank you, David. And you and I will talk again soon. So stopping recording now.